And I think we are live. So for all of you tuning in today, welcome to another webinar by CFO Connect. One of our rituals, routines, habits, whatever you want to call it, we always ask our audience to, in the chat, drop in where they're tuning from because we have a very global and diverse community. So it's always fun to see where people are watching this webinar from. So please in the chat, drop where you're tuning in from. I'm here with Kolja Heskamp from torq.partners. Kolja, where are you these days?
I am based out of Berlin, and luckily, since we're remote first, I'm mostly in Berlin.
Nice. Well, I also am joining you from Berlin. So hello, welcome. I see Jan is tuning in from South Africa. I see Rebecca from North Carolina in the US. I see Nico with, I think that's the Statue of Liberty emoji, so assuming that's New York. Yuko also from Berlin, Michael from Munich. We also have Matthias from Oldenburg, Germany. Diego from Spain. So yes, a lot of people tuning in from around the globe for this very special finance-related webinar. So while people are settling in, CFO Connect is a private community of finance leaders. We host events like this one on a monthly basis. We put out content. We have resources and insights that are produced by expert finance leaders. We have a private Slack group as well. And you can learn more in the chats. We just dropped a link. CFO Connect is powered by Spendesk, and Spendesk is a spend management platform that gives finance leaders full visibility to make smarter decisions. And you can also learn more about Spendesk in the chats. Enough about that. This month is all about data. And so we are joined by torq.partners managing partner, Kolja Heskamp. You can also learn about torq.partners in the chat. And he will be providing you with insights and strategies to build a data structure that enables your organization to make better decisions. Before I hand the mic over to you, Kolja, a few housekeeping items. So if you have any questions, we have a dedicated Q&A tab on the right side panel. So please ask your questions there and make sure to upvote your favorite questions so that Kolja knows which ones to answer first. We will be sending a full recording of this session after the webinar. So keep an eye out for your email. You can watch all favorite moments. And we will also be creating a written recap as well in the coming weeks on our blog. So with that said, Kolja, the floor is yours. And please take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. First of all, before I turn on some slides, so you don't just have to look at my face the entire time, I want to say thank you for coming. I'm honored having people from all around the world here. Truly exciting also from my side. And today I want to talk a little bit about data structure. I think in all fairness, I'm coming at this, and you will see why, from the CFO position or the finance manager position or the director finance position. So essentially very much focused around that area and how to carry it into an organization, how to assume that role also in your C-level suite. So I'm not going to talk about specific tech stacks or which accounting system to use or anything along the lines, but going to try and draw from my experience to show you what the generalist way is of approaching the topic and building a truly data-driven company, and some of the steps of getting there. So without further ado, we can already start. While I am doing my self-presentation and tell you a little bit about torq.partners, there are going to be two polls being put into the poll section. I see the first one is just flying in. And this would just be interesting. While I'm introducing myself, you take the time to answer essentially what your preferred answer is here, to give me a little bit of background as well of where you're standing. So as mentioned, I'm managing partner and one of the founders of torq.partners. We are an organization based in Germany, however, with another office in Amsterdam as well. and approximately 95 employees. We have worked over the last 3.5 years with 450 clients. Those clients are exclusively startups and scale-ups. Everything from 2 people in a basement needing a business plan, all the way to post-IPO support in accounting, in controlling, but also in people and culture. So if you're imagining us, we're serving startups and scale-ups within the field of finance and people and culture, and it breaks down into interim management. If you want to be fancy, call it finance as a service or people as a service, where we're filling gaps from the C-level suite all the way to preparatory accounting, as well as recruiting and more clerical work. We're also doing project work. That might be you need an ERP system, but if you're honest with yourself, you've never seen an ERP system before and need someone to come in and scope it out with you, and then also help you in the implementation, negotiating with the respective partners and so on. And lastly, we're working with venture capital funds as well as corporate venture capital funds on due diligences. You can see that here listed also as one of the KPIs. And that typically from pre-seed all the way up to Series C, as well as valuation work on startups, supporting M&A teams that potentially did not have that much exposure yet, to then be able to understand the startup world a little bit better. Any given month, we're working with 120 to 140 startups. Always depends a little bit on how large they are and what the background is there. A couple of names you see here, the basic trust wall, essentially. You see some old established players, whether it's an Outfittery here, or you also see some of the rising stars or already risen stars like a Razor Group, an Urban Sports Club. But as I mentioned, we also work with, for instance, in the past with the Fraunhofer Institute, we're working with accelerators in the Netherlands, Accord Fastlane, to work on very young companies as well. My role at this is, next to being the managing partner and obviously having to be an entrepreneur and manage my own company, my work here is somewhat between the business development side, but also on the side of actually working with our clients and supporting them. And within that, my general expertise are working capital management. As you can see on the right, I had very capital intense companies, InFarm with vertical farming, Termondo with heating systems being installed, Outfittery with clothing and e-commerce being sent left to right. But I've also had the joy of dipping my toes into other business models, like, for instance, the Fabricant from Amsterdam, offering fashion for the metaverse, being a crypto play at that. And I typically engage from a pre-seed to Series C's perspective. So everything about early structures and scaling and establishing a finance function essentially from scratch. And I have helped in the last 7 years 130 startups. It's a crazy number, to be fair, but I've helped 130 startups within the different fields, to master their challenges. To be fair, mostly within Europe as well as Israel. So I have not yet touched toes in the US or Canada, as I've seen a couple of you are here from the US as well and from North America in general. But I think the learnings are applicable to all of you. So what are we going to look at? Well, fancy title, how to build a data infrastructure that empowers decision-making. What I would like to do today is giving you, from the experience of 130 clients, myself, but also the experience that we have as a company, to get a little bit of an insight of how to get started. Because typically, this is not something that ever stops having to be developed. Empowerment is a full-time job. It is something that you'll have to do from day one until the day you exit and beyond that as well. And what I want to start with is, what are first steps? How do we start conceptualizing how a data infrastructure can look like? I want to talk about specific strategies that you can do as a finance manager, as a founder, as a CFO, as whatever your function is. I think it's very important to say data is not something that relies, or data management that relies with one person. You really have to spread out in the organization. and establish the methodology. And I want to engage on how I think is a good way of doing that. And throughout, we are going to address how we can keep things agile within it, because things will change, your structure will change, your tooling setup will change, and how we can stay on top of that. And to say it with Henning Mankell, knowledge is the correct understanding of information. And I would like that for all of you to keep in mind when we're discussing the topic. So first of all, if we're thinking about a data-driven organization, a lot of people that are starting up have trouble visualizing why this is becoming a problem. I'm sitting here with my 2 co-founders in a room. We may have hired 2 or 3 people, and information is flowing, and it's flowing easily. And whatever happens on a daily basis with our 5 or 10 or 15 customers is being discussed and is being on point. However, that will start ceasing very, very quickly the moment your team expands. And on the right, I just gave you the picture of the different communication line existing with 10 members in a team already. But imagine how that looks like when it's not 10 members, individual ones. But if we're talking about 10 departments that each have 10 to 20 to 100 people in it, data is essentially an issue of learning. And the things that have helped you drive at the beginning, keeping a very steep learning curve, being able to evaluate findings, even the smallest minute data points that you were able to exchange, discuss upon, and then act upon, are becoming ever more big and grander and more data, even to amount where it just simply becomes overbearing, overloading, and you are, well, dropping in a hole where data suddenly from something that has been very, very easily assessed and very easy shared becomes one of your biggest challenges going forward, and understanding how can we move forward and how can we make decisions. And if we're thinking about this not as a purely technical issue in terms of where do I save the data, which tools do I use, what data warehouse do I build, but I'm looking at this from a learning point of view, and learning and keeping a steep learning curve at that, we have some challenges that we need to address. And first of all, as we already see on the right, your team size and your company size will bring with it an increasing amount of coordination and communication requirements. It's not going to be as easy to share anymore. We do need to suddenly take time to reflect things that have happened on the company floor, on the shared co-working space. Talking about it is not enough anymore. Plus, people are going to start losing context. We are looking at language barriers, and I'm literally talking not about English and German and Spanish, but I'm talking about language barriers in the perceived worldview that different specialists have when you move away further from a more generalist organization to a more specialist organization over time. And then lastly, the balance between learning and execution. So how do I come from learning, from trying, to an execution mindset? Is at the beginning of a startup fairly straightforward. You take your MVP, you do your A/B testing, you go from learning to execution. But later on, there's more pressure to execute. There's more pressure on traction, and suddenly the learning element starts falling flat. And those are the challenges that I want to address today. Not necessarily in that order, but we will be addressing all of them. And first of all, step number 1 for any organization, and I do not care how large as an organization you are, stands building a map. And from a CFO point of view, if I'm coming in and there's a team, a company of maybe 30, 40 people, you are standing at the front and there is individual compartmentalized information. So in silos, essentially. And we're not just talking about data, we're talking about understanding of how the business works. So in a lot of cases, we're sitting down and the first step is explain me how things are working. And if you're coming into an organization or you need a restart within your organization of how you want to manage data, of how you want to become data driven, you will have to start visualizing. That means you need to understand how customers and goods are flowing through your organization. Of course, where are things coming in? How are they moving through? How will things keep moving along? Which KPIs are involved? Which processes are involved? Because in the end, to make sense out of the data that you're gathering, you need to understand what the reality is behind it. That means obviously interdependencies as well, and then arriving at a KPI tree, a driver tree, is some of you may know it as well, but that is all an outcome from a process map and looking at it physically. And the beauty of it is, if you start to learn pointing the finger at the problem and pointing it on the process map, even if we are talking about something that is capable of covering a whole wall, eventually that will start helping you also in how to empower your organization. How can you do that? I literally just copied the BPMN 2.0. I personally am a big friend of business process modeling notions. The ones of you that are more maybe potentially from a more development side of you might know this already. What I can simply say is you don't need to be perfect at this, and this doesn't have to be translatable into code right away. But it is about finding a system and finding a common language also between departments of talking about it and making this a requirement for people. You want to talk about a process, you want to talk about how you interpret data and what is happening and what KPIs you're looking at, then do show me your map and show me how it integrates into the larger organization and how we can go about this further. And this is a breathing and living document. And to be fair, most of the things that we will be discussing today will be a breathing document, since it never stops. It will never stop being a topic and top of mind. So first of all, sit down, talk to the individual departments, and start mapping your process. At the beginning, this will be extremely easy because frankly, there are not a lot of processes and there's very few people involved. But if that is something that you can pick up as early as possible, even if you're now in a Series A potentially, if you can still pick this up and do the work, you will see it will evolve and it will help an entire organization actually understanding what you're doing. And then also for the decision makers, understanding what other departments are talking about and where potential concerns are arising and where they can potentially make decisions on an individual basis or isolated. So the question of decentralizing your insight generation and also your management. So once we have sat down and we actually started modeling, we do have the next problem, and that is creating the common language around it. And this is potentially the biggest issue that we are encountering in growing organization. I could ask right now what you think your customer acquisition costs are and how you would just post them in here and you could start comparing. And if we would then get down to, so what's your definition of customer acquisition costs? You would see that all of you would potentially have a different answer. And what is true between different companies is most certainly also true within companies. I am doing quite a lot of educational workshops for venture capitalists as well, where we are talking about the finance organization and what are levers that you as an investor can start enforcing so that your companies are better at making data-driven decisions. And one of the first things that pops up is build a KPI booklet, build a definition guide, which tells you where sources are coming from, where data is coming from. Because what we see is that in a growing organization, the more people start talking about data and findings, you actually have to have discussions of definitions first. And these have to be universally true. This is not about you having found a smart ratio or clever way of doing it. No problem. Introduce it into the booklet, make it available to everyone else and make it transparent and make it in a documented sense, because otherwise you will never truly discuss findings, but you will be stuck in definition work. Which simple things, obviously unique naming and definitions, I mean, I think that should go without saying. But once you've done that, you then need to understand what are manageable drivers of your business and what are simply overview KPIs. So if we're talking about a driver tree, if we're looking at what is your operational cash flow, that is not a KPI that is strictly seen manageable. Or if it's the only KPI that you have in cash, it's not manageable because there's no action which you can directly attribute to it. So understanding the roll up of different KPIs and how they roll into each other and what are the interdependencies within your company, which again is something that you derive off from your process map, is absolutely essential to keep understanding your KPIs and making sure that you are, first of all, keeping all the different aspects in mind, keeping the different process players in mind, and then talk about the same thing. It's very important to talk about the same thing, because otherwise decisions are made on wrong assumptions, things are not being included, and latest, if your CFO and CEO have to start presenting it in front of the board or the next managing round, and you actually have someone in the due diligence that dives deep into your economics, you will find out this is becoming problematic, because it's not so much about what your definition is. There are some commonly agreed upon standards, of course. However, generally speaking, some people will have another opinion. This may change your entire business, and being able to show what your definition is and also being able to then adjust certain information for it if someone wants a different view, very important. And also the hierarchy of importance of certain KPIs. We all know vanity KPIs or vanity metrics, things you like to look at because they look great. But even then, if you have proper roll-ups in your KPIs, it's also something to diffuse and start talking about findings that actually matter in the larger concept. You can obviously take that further and start defining lever sizes and start defining impact sizes of different KPIs. But that is essentially what I mean with a hierarchy of importance of your KPIs. So we are at a stage where we said, okay, we came in, we started mapping the different aspects of the business. We have a four-sided platform. We have whatever you may have in e-commerce. We need to understand the different levels of what are in there. That is all great. And all of that, what we've done so far, mapping and definition work, sounds incredibly centralized in its, setup. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because most organizations go from a very loose, decentral network of individual people having information, making decisions, and loosely coming together in an unstructured way of challenging each other's decision to then walk off again. All organizations walk through a stage of centralization where they need to put a framework around it. You can also call it a harness or chains, I do not care. But the point being, you do need to provide frame, structure, nurturing ground to make things possible. So whenever we talk about this, the most successful organizations that we see have a framework in place. They have clear review schedules when they're changing definitions, when people can then come in and challenge different aspects of the framework. There's a clear infrastructure and tool environment. We'll go into that a little bit later again. And there are decision-making limitations and budget regulations. There is an expectation of what certain levels can be reached and what certain levels can be done without it raising suspicion, without it having to be micromanaged. Because part of becoming empowered means giving decision power to individuals, to individual departments, units, countries, and so on. You can really roll that up to any size that you want. But if we have the central aspect of it, you do have to have a push towards making it decentral eventually, again, because you as the business intelligence manager or the CFO cannot sit there and make every single decision based on data either. You need to give the decision-making power off again into the department. So we are talking from the decentral aspects, and it should be a mix of things. You need to give it down again to the units. You need to allow for bilateral communications, and you need to have analysis and interpretation where they can make sense of what you're doing. And if we are looking at the poll that I've asked you beforehand, we do see that approximately 60% of you are already in a mixed environment, but more people still tend to be centralized versus decentralized. And potentially that is just because you are going through the stage, but it is a question that you should keep asking yourself on how can I also stay efficient and effective and cannot take the agility away from different departments. So ideally, it is a mix and it remains a mix that needs to be renegotiated over and over again, specifically if things have gone wrong, which we will all know. But that is something to keep in mind. The discussion of central and decentral and how you do it specifically also largely depends on the product that you're making. If you have a marketing organization that is very much on a brand, if it's very much brand oriented, there will not be individual KPIs. If you start putting KPI metrics and a harness on them that is too tight, it's not going to work. If you are, however, in an environment where you have a very clear acquisition strategy from performance marketing all the way down through how your sales is converting, that will potentially be a lot more centralized in a way of how the data is being captured and what the measurement standards are. So again, there, it does take time to get into it and to start understanding how do I actually draw the boundary. And I wish there would be a clear rule of thumb, but generally, the more performance pressure is there, the more set something is. In innovation management, we will talk about a performance engine, something that needs to work from beginning to end, versus the more explorative, more, let's call it growth engine oriented elements of your business. There you need to start dividing up and see where you need to give more leash and give more decentral decision-making power for the individual departments. And again, when we're talking about these decentralized aspects, what we often see is then we are talking about KPIs, we are talking about a certain framework that we have been setting, but a lot of times things are working outside of a rhythm. So once you have, as I described at the beginning stage, you're talking fairly quickly, you're talking on the hallway, you're talking over desks, and you do start analyzing. In a growing organization, this will not work anymore. And a lot of times, thinking about your data infrastructure, how you empower an organization, a lot of startup founders have the tendency to start micromanaging because they are losing their grip on data. And this is educational work for you. And this is also how you can live data methodology. You do need to give time for initiatives to actually run through, to come to a conclusion, to start showing results. So I like to always give the example of you're not discussing the choreography of your dance during the performance. You need to give time and room and make clear to your entire organization. Marketing is changing a campaign. We need to give them 2 weeks time. So we're not, as an organization, we're not going to look at the data every single day now. And if there's the smallest dip in it, we say, all hands off, doesn't work, kill it off. But we're giving time to come to fruition and then discuss things at set intervals. That has the beauty of freeing up your mind. If you have cleared your fixes in which you discuss deviations that are existing, you're not talking, oh, we are on plan and on revenue, and now I'm very happy because we're on plan. I genuinely do not care. That was the plan that we've been setting, and I don't need to now have an answer of why you hit your targets. You hit your targets. But I need to talk about the things that are deviating, both positive and negative, and need to ask the people in that meeting to start giving an explanation for it. That also, and that is for the people here that are more in a centralized organization still, that does require you to give data ahead of time and give people time to analyze it. And not on the spot, look at the numbers together and immediately say, okay, Dave, please give me the interpretation of what you're seeing here. And the person has seen it for the first time, for whatever reason that is. But give people actually time to argue and analyze and give their opinion on things. That does feel very contrary to how you imagine probably startup is working, extremely fast, making quick decisions, testing things out. Fair enough, but it's not going to work in a growing organization, and it's something that needs to be kept in mind going forward. So a number is being communicated, which are being shown beforehand, giving people time to analyze, giving people time to actually look at it. Absolutely essential in how we're dealing with each other and how a growing organization can survive. And also have clear responsibilities of who is in charge and who is responsible for individual KPIs. So what we see a lot is, okay, Kolja, you're the CFO and you are now in charge of EBITDA. But you cannot make any decisions on our hiring. You cannot make any decisions on the pricing. You cannot make any decisions on our marketing spend. You cannot make any. That doesn't work either. So there's again of what KPIs are monitoring, what KPIs are manageable, who is managing, and then start giving them also the power to actually manage it and develop a sense of trust in that. And lastly, do not start discussing strategy in KPI meetings and data-driven meetings, but look at the numbers, look at the day-to-day implications and how things are moving along in that respect. So we have discussed a little bit the role of finance in this, and this is a very simplified view of how the typical finance function progresses over time. So typically what we see at the beginning, finance is essentially the housekeeping unit. You are throwing your invoices over the fence to your accounting, to your bookkeeping provider, whatever it may be. And no one really looks at the numbers. You have your CRM system, or you have your 3 or 4 G sheets and Excel lists where you're tracking your things, and that's your only truth, which removes the entity or the finance function almost away from the business. We then see it progressing. And this also what I want to stress is, if you want to become truly data-driven, you need to ask, how is a function like finance positioned in your company? And I want to make one big disclaimer here. This can also be the business intelligence unit. That doesn't have to be separate from each other. I generally do believe that a modern finance unit has to be a business intelligence unit, with at least within part of the context of what it is doing. So you're moving further towards finance sort of being a project manager, a lot of ad hoc requests, and you're now in charge of the budget, and you're doing that, and you can start challenging other departments. But the stage that I theoretically want to get to as fast as possible, and also driving the analysis when we're coming into companies, is how can we turn finance or business intelligence, or how can we push the information gathering into the center of the business and become a sparring partner for everyone else. Because the beauty is that facts and figures can be the universal language of what your business is, and collecting, maintaining, generating, of course, but that is the stage that we need to get to. And anything before that is never going to give you the power. And this takes more than having a lot of convincing to do. But this is not necessarily a technical issue. That is an issue of what you think your role is and how you start portraying that towards the management and how you start pushing for it. And that means establishing a common sense on data needs to work, establishing that we want decisions to be based on data. And that goes to the second question. I'm very happy that no one clicked less than 25% of their decisions are being made with data, but that we are somewhere between 25 and 75%. You will have to maintain a certain leap of faith attitude, of course. All companies have to. But generally speaking, having a solid basis and working towards finance becoming that. And that goes through taking initiative. Take initiative in mapping. Go there and say, I want to map everything. And that is a lot of resources that will flow into that. Again, if you start early, it's a lot less effort than if you start in a Series B. But going there, taking it, understanding your business holistically. Start initiative on a KPI booklet to discuss with the individual departments, with the individual people, how do they see the business? Where can we take it? Where can we go? How do we measure it? What is important? What is interdependent with each other? And you don't necessarily need to do that all by yourself. as well. That is something that you can give also more junior employees to start learning the company. It does not necessarily require a dedicated person, at least not at first. At first, it needs a project. Later on, it will require more dedicated personnel. Because that is what I hear everyone saying whenever I talk about building structures and investing in infrastructure is obviously, look, dude, we don't really have the resources to do that. We are hustling from round to round. I am aware that cash is the limiting factor to a lot of these things. But as that picture portrays, I do know that a lot of times you are going to be strapped for cash and your cash account is going to run dangerously low before the next round comes. But make sure to keep these things in mind, because if you want to become a company that has a chance going towards an exit, that going towards an IPO specifically, because that's going to be a lot more important in an IPO than it is in a trade sale, it does require you to start investing. And we're not talking, you need this fanciest business intelligence software and all of it. I mean, I've seen in a couple of the sign-up questions for the webinar, how can I move away from G-Sheets? How can I? Yes, okay, G-Sheets aren't the answer for too long, but I mean, half of the financial industry is built on Excel. So you may also survive that, but it's a lot more about processes, about mindset, about how people are involved. And then starting to optimize from a tool set and a software set, how you can start enhancing this. It becomes a lot easier, and you do need to take the investments when you have the money for it, but in the end there's so much next to free software which you can use, which you should get started on, and it is a puzzle that you need to keep on building and whose pieces are going to change over time. So as we said, empowering an organization is a full-time commitment, and a couple of strategies which I find helpful when trying to establish all of the stuff that I just talked about is, first of all, understanding that without timely data, you're done for. And this is specifically true for the finance organization. If you have a monthly closing process that gives you the numbers a month and a half after the fact, and not 10 days after the fact, that is not attributed, because the simple things, let's look at cost centers, let's look at other attribution logics, let's have a look of how we're using our account schedule. But if you can't provide it in a timely manner, in an attributed manner, it will not matter. Things have moved too quickly along for you to have any impact. And if you want to carry a data strategy and a methodology into your company that really drives empowerment, you first of all need to do your own homework. That means delivering data on time and making sure that your department is a role model in that. Secondly, and I do read that a lot, okay, what is the best tool stack? What is this and that? Well, to be fair, I've seen every single tool stack essentially work, including Excel lists. It doesn't really matter. And it should not always be at the core of it. Obviously, if you're in a stage where you start optimizing, yes, go out there, exchange with others, talk about tool stacks that might make sense and things that are stage appropriate. Your investors might have an idea, others in accelerator programs, founders around you, which again stresses the point why it's always good to sit in a city that has a startup cluster to start exchanging on these topics. But you need to understand that the software that you're using now might be obsolete within the next 12 months or 18 months. So the mindset of having these changing pieces and treating them as such is very, very important to keep that in mind. One of the tips that we'll see on the next slide is, if you can in later stages, employ something like a Tableau, for instance, where you have a single software which you keep as your BI software. And it doesn't really matter whether your CRM system is changing or accounting system is changing or other systems are coming in. If you have something universal, even though it's not the sexiest tool in the world, that can already help getting you also a certain sense of consistency into it. But software is a moving target as well. The question of, do you have to have a person that is dedicated to this? The way we see this is almost always the same. Start yourself. Understand what is happening. Once you have pushed past a certain stage and you have a good understanding of how to get this done, you've done the mapping and so on, it is a lot of work keeping the map up to date. It is a lot of work keeping the KPI booklet up to date. It will get easier over time because things are less in flux at some point. Then it is time to hire a dedicated person and to get this done. And then typically we are moving forward towards business partnering. So if you're thinking again from it's decentral, I need to be part of the management team, be able to discuss this. We are then moving to a more centralized stage with a dedicated person that is carrying together data, presenting it. And then we need to give the power away, because just having the power and not distributing it doesn't help any of you. So you need to go out, and typically the way that we're doing this is by establishing business partnering. That might mean that within the operations department, which is now 100 people, there is a dedicated operations controller, a person that is sitting there making sure that data is up to point, but always liaison back to the business intelligence department or the controlling or finance. It doesn't really matter, but that has always up to date. What are the definitions? What are we looking at? How are things in context? But can give you the insight to make your decisions and work for the individual department themselves. So that is usually a way of how we're going about that, similar to how HR departments, people and culture departments are starting to partnering for specific types of employees with their individual needs and the individual preferences for individual departments. And also important is accept gut feeling decisions when they're necessary. Having an obsession to only do everything data-driven, specifically in early stages, is the death of your business. You do need to try a lot. And every growing organization does require leaps of faith, as one of my favorite VC investors would say. But just make them transparent. Be honest with yourself. That was a total gut decision right now. And yes, it worked out or it didn't work out. But progressively make sure that you understand what is the performance engine in your business and what is the growth engine. So what are the elements that are aimed at providing growth? And even then, just because you have a performance marketing that is trying new campaigns, the new campaigns can be part of the growth engine while the rest is part of the performance engine. So drawing lines, analyzing things under the aspect of where they aimed at growth, where they aimed at providing performance, how are we looking at things? Always being aware, I need gut decisions, but I need to separate them as far as possible from my performance engine, and I need to be aware when I'm making gut decisions. And it's absolutely necessary to make them. We talked already about the stable analysis tool, the stable setup, which does help to rather let people generate views and let them generate reports for themselves and let them explore, which I find very important. But let them explore in a framework where definitions are clear, where you're only allowed to call something EBITDA if it's EBITDA, if you're only allowed to call something CAC if it's CAC. That is already a way of empowering them and making sure that they can also be explorative, they can keep a keen mind, they can stay agile in their thinking and not restricted only to the reports that you are doing. However, also in reports, there's a hierarchy involved, and something like Tableau allows you different sections of saying company-wide reports. Let's put these things in here. Let's have them also be universally accepted and make sure that they are peer-reviewed. Is very academic, understand that, but whenever a report is moving up the hierarchy because it's just a genius idea of looking at the business, it needs to be peer-reviewed to make sure and enable trust in the data and trust in the system. Because lastly, the worst thing that can happen is that you're showing numbers which keep changing in the past because things were forgotten or you didn't do things. You do also always need to keep in mind that it is a trust business, working with people and building an empowerment system. So make sure that people have the right definitions and have the right tools at hand to do that. And lastly, I already said that as well, don't commit on a tool that may be replaced, typically the accounting system or the CRM system. So sticking with HubSpot might be a good idea, but might not be a good idea if there's a potential to change it because it might just not work in certain geographies that you want to move in. And then thank you, Volkswagen, for the beautiful marketing image that they've created of the egg-laying wool providing a milk-giving pig. For the Germans among us, I did do the German name below it. whatever you do, you will not find the ideal setup. Whatever you do, you will not find the ideal candidate, but it's important to keep the rule of 1% in mind. Whatever you do a little bit better than you did it the day before helps. Whatever you do to get a bit more clarity, a bit more consistency in it will help you along the way. And having an empowered organization starts with a mindset. It starts with education, then comes through initiative of mapping things, allowing for navigation and exploration. It goes through having clear rules of engagement, which means I have meetings where things are discussed. I'm having a priority of how things are being discussed and data is being discussed. I'm creating a common language through my KPI booklets, my sources, which may change over time, but I'm giving clarity. And then if I do all that ideally and have a tech department which is backing me up, because the entire organization is understanding how absolutely crucial and important it is to have an organization like that, you will actually become empowered. And it is amazing how many amazing and great decisions are being made on all different levels of an organization if you actually give them the data and the decision-making power to pull through, and you will see your organization scale.
Thank you, Kolja. Really appreciate you diving deep into this topic and being extremely, extremely thorough. So I really think that our viewers today really appreciate you taking the time to share these tips. We have about 15 minutes left, and I saw there's a few questions that have been asked. So what I'll do is I'll shoot them over to you right now, and you can answer them. I see one from Jeffrey de Bouvier. Sorry if I butchered your name. He's asking, we typically use different tools for departments/processes. How important is it to gather all data in a centralized warehouse? And have you seen effective data strategies spread across different tools?
It is not uncommon that different departments use different software to work with. I mean, that is just a given. But I do believe that specifically if they roll up into a common strategy, you do have to have a central data warehouse where things are labeled as such, where clears where they come out. A lot of times, if we're looking at what have certain sign-ups been, which you're tracking potentially through a CRM system, you do see that Google has a different view. And it's okay that you have that, but it needs to be clear which data source is in the lead, which data source is the right one. So we're also talking about a hierarchy of data sources which we have in there. So specifically, if you have a lot of different tools, it's very important to define which data point is being progressed into which system and where is it used. And that is, again, where the process mapping comes in. It's not so, again, everything can work. We have seen things where Excel lists have worked until an IPO. The point being is, it is usually a coordination exercise and making sure that there's clarity. And if there's anything that starts bothering people, or that people have different definitions or see different numbers of leads, it's usually a question of sitting down and saying, what is the important timestamp? What system does it have to be answered? And which system has the best data source for that? And if you're gathering then the raw data in a data warehouse and tag it as such, even if you have maybe competing data points with it, which are again labeled as such, then it's not a problem. But generally speaking, the further you progress, also about different countries where you might have different software, where you don't even have a choice to take the same software, you do have to have a central warehouse where you stock things.
Thank you for that. Another question, this is from Anonymous. They are asking, where is a good place to start? As a new CFO encountering data debt issues, how does one begin to address the financial and operational challenges? Rather than reinventing the wheel, what resources are out there to tap into in order to save time and, more importantly, save money?
If you have data debt, and you are money constrained, there's hardly anything that you can do about it. To be utterly clear on that, you can usually start in finance. You would be talking about, oh, let's rebook the entire last year. That's not feasible. It's never feasible. what we find most helpful is, and very clear also in communication with the board and the rest of the management, today is day 0. Now we start doing this. This is what we're collecting. This is the new structure. And if you're then running into a DD situation where people are actually looking at what has been happening in the past, try and match it as good as possible, but just be clear about your limitations. This has not happened. And if you're missing crucial data, start collecting as soon as possible. Again, if you don't have the money to clean up, cleanups are insanely expensive. We do see them before IPOs where companies suddenly decide, oh, wow, we now suddenly need to rebook our last 3 years. Look, I'm not complaining. I'm making good money with these projects. But from a point of view of you just need to keep rolling, there's hardly anything you can do. Or my idea would always be make clear what rules apply at what moment, try to get as close as possible to it. But at some point, you need to bury the topic and move on.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for your very candid and harsh truth answer there. Two more questions before we wrap things up. There's one question also from Anonymous, which is asking how to deal with biased historical data and KPI in a growing company, and how to not fall into the trap of wrongly interpreting it.
If you can still, and there we're going back to my process map and my definition booklet. The first thing I would ask myself is if there was anything different back then to that specific KPI, and if I am capable, let's assume you have the data generally, but considering, can I recollect of how it was different and can I make adjustments to it to fit a new definition? Or even, am I capable of taking my current data and applying it in the logic that I used to have before? Because obviously historical data is very important to start drawing conclusions from. So again, it would be an exercise of, can I match this as close as possible to have consistency in the data point? If I'm then very unhappy because I'm realizing there are certain aspects that are utterly missing in it, I'm sort of running into the same issue that I have with certain data depth issues, that I just can't recollect them, or they have been just utterly wrong. But this is, again, trying to always get it to the same basis. I would never compare apples and pears, as we like to say in Germany. I would always try to get it on the same level, and I wouldn't mind so much if it has an old definition, as long as I'm comfortable driving conclusions from it. The issue in these organizations usually is that no one is left that can tell you what has happened and how things have happened, which then obviously presents the new problem that you're not sure if they're the same. Then I would always go with the assumption that the newest data is most important. I'm drawing back on data for potentially the last half year, and then need to see if I can find people in my network that can help me, support me, finding interpretation for things that potentially have data points because they're further along, and start discussing. Because I think one of the truths is startups do talk quite a lot with each other in the background, even if it doesn't happen in the press. To be, as long as you start sharing, usually people start sharing as well. And it does make a difference whether you're talking about your customer acquisition costs and your conversion rates versus your revenue and your bottom line. There is a way in between where you can have discussions, and I would search for that. But I would be very, if there would still be in old reports, I would cut it off. I wouldn't even show it anymore, and just make sure that no one is looking at it to misinterpret it in the first place.
Cool. Thanks a lot. And so I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. We are at time. So I wanted to, again, thank you, Kolja, for taking the time and diving deep into this subject. And I really hope the audience out there, you guys really appreciated this and got value from it. So just to let you know, we will be sending this recording as a recap. For those who are still watching, we're really trying to improve our webinars on a regular basis and make sure that it's something that you enjoy and are getting value from. So we have a survey in the chat. It takes 30 seconds. It's 2 questions. So we would really appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinars and the experience for you. So like I said, look for the email after this session. We'll be sending the recording. We'll also have a written recap with all of the top insights from Kolja. So please really give me a hand to thank Kolja, so you can drop a thank you in the chat, and we will see you next month for a brand new webinar. So stay tuned for that as well. And again, thank you everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of the week and a good Easter break. So everyone, goodbye. Have a nice evening.